Well, in the first instance, thanks for everyone. In the first instance, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Charles Radcliffe, he's a serial entrepreneur who's focused his career on solving tough technology challenges with some of the largest organizations. He's built and sold 3 technology companies. He is head of AI at Fidelity International. He's currently a Forbes contributing writer and is a visiting fellow at the University of Bristol. Next, we've got Foteini Agrafioti. She's the Chief Science Officer at RBC and head of Borealis AI. She's responsible for RBC's intellectual property portfolio in the fields of AI and machine learning. And last, we've got Joanne Hannaford. She is the head of the technology division for EMEA, is a partner at Goldman Sachs, and has a PhD in AI. So thank you very much. And of course, Josh. Yeah. You're all part of large organizations that are wrestling with innovation and technology, including the operational deployment of AI. Indeed, you're on the front lines of seeding a lot of that innovation yourselves. Before we take the conversation anywhere else, I'd love to sort out a definitional point. What do you understand by scale? To the extent that scale means maybe a prioritization on different things. Like, how do you think about scale? How would you define scale?
So yeah, it's a great question. I think the thing that I think a lot of people kind of lose when we're talking about scale is that they think that sort of scale for its own sake is a good thing. I think the important thing is there's a right sizing of scale, and I think you've got to build an innovation capability for an organisation that's right for you as a firm. And sometimes you can get too big. This event maybe is slightly too big in terms of. I think you've got to get that balance right, and I think that's probably the most difficult job as an entrepreneur working inside a large corporate. You're always so optimistic and enthusiastic about the potential. It's very easy to get carried away. You've just got to kind of rein it in sometimes.
Foteini?
So when we think of AI at RBC, we see 2 areas where we could be applying that across our businesses. So there's the traditional models that we have in place across any business, from wealth to retail to capital markets. And there's about, I think we measured 20,000 of those running at any given point in a large enterprise. And there's also the new business opportunities that AI and advances in machine learning are now enabling for our businesses. And so for us, it's all about how do we enable completely new services for our clients, innovate, stay relevant in our clients' lives, because they use these technologies elsewhere. The expectation is that they will use it when they bank with us as well. But also bring the organization to a level where it's also competitive in how it uses machine learning models across the enterprise with all those 20,000 models. So the challenge in front of us is really how do we do that at scale? How do we move to deploying proper autonomous machine learning, but at the same time leave no model behind, bring everything with us?
Joanne?
Goldman Sachs is 150 years old today, this year. And so, to a certain extent, kind of the topics of innovation, we're kind of used to innovating as an organisation. I mean, 150 years ago, I don't think the telegram was invented. So, in terms of just scaling innovation across an organisation, we've kind of worked that out. I think, to me, scale is really about managing complexity. And in this context, does AI produce a level of complexity that means the kind of common understanding of its usage? Does that present a particular challenge to an organisation that has a large number of people? I mean, ultimately, when we talk about scale, you're really talking about a large number of people acting in a common way to a common purpose, a well-understood purpose. And I think later in this panel, we're going to get into that topic. But when I think about AI, I deliberately relate it to complexity. And if you've read any books about medicine and pharmaceuticals, arguably, through the use of machine learning and AI, they have struggled with the complexity, in an already complex, unpredictable domain. And there are parallelisms between that and financial services. And I think for us to be very thoughtful, we really have to really think about those questions. And, I'll talk a bit about how we're addressing that.
So I think the measure, I think, for us is relatively straightforward. It's number of customers affected, and then the depth within each of those initiatives will happen. So the outcome is there. I'd actually agree with Joanne. And that's why we talk about this whole ways of working and style, because it's the nature of the change that generates the complexity that means it's a much harder conversation than certain of the other changes that happen.
Can you describe some of your respective organizations' landmark successes, innovation successes, let's say specifically involving AI? Like what are the kinds of, where have you been most successful in implementing AI and getting to scale? Can you characterize those successes? Charles.
So I'll give you a very honest answer. I think we're right at the beginning of our journey with AI. So I think when we have a small success, we sometimes can run the risk of taking it a little bit too far and saying, look at what we've done, and kind of saying this is kind of the benchmark. And I think reality is there's some other organisations that are achieving a lot more from their investments. And so the question is really at this early stage of our time with AI, what are the things that we've got to get right? And the thing you've got to get right, I think, straight up is strategy. If you've got a strategy for your AI initiatives, then you're likely to be able to get value from that investment. The second thing you really need to do is to not focus on the technology so much as focus on the opportunity around the organization. And that's kind of where we are at the moment in Fidelity, is we're looking at where the demand is internally for AI, and then from there we can prioritize what are the quick wins that we can get some successes under our belt, and what's the really big stuff that is going to really move the needle in terms of risk reduction or cost reduction or even revenue opportunity. And you've got to balance that, I think, with governance, and I think that's kind of exactly where we are at this moment in time. We've got an AI strategy in place, so now we're good to go. And now we can focus on, looking at where the opportunities are, executing on those, and then balancing that with the governance side.
Where has RBC been most successful? And maybe a little bit more specifically, is it in, the scale deployment of solutions that you've developed yourselves, or is it at the level of, the implementation of solutions that have been developed elsewhere?
So we decided to split the business of data science from AI early on at RBC. It's something that allowed us to build completely different capabilities, recognizing that the talent also that is equipped to perform these different types of tasks is very different. You can have a lot of data science groups, you can have a lot of analysts. They're not trained to do AI. This is a completely different educational background sometimes, but also knowledge of state-of-the-art machine learning. So we invested in-house in building groups in both directions. And we have a core research group, about 100 people today, mostly PhDs in machine learning focused on AI and new business opportunities. And we have large data science groups tackling what I just described, that bringing all of that big old organization up to date with state-of-the-art machine learning. So on the latter side, you would see applications of ML in fraud and risk, and any model you'd find traditionally in a financial services company. But what's interesting now is using proper artificial intelligence, the types of new capabilities we're developing. Just to give you an example, two areas we've been really successful so far is in natural language processing. We built a system called Apollo that reads the news every day, and it developed that intuition about what is important and relevant for the trajectory of different companies. And should it come across something that needs human attention, it creates an alert and notifies analysts across our businesses. Every morning about 200 people at RBC will receive custom notifications from that brain that reads news in the background in different languages all through the day and decides what's important for the client portfolios that you're interested in. We've also been very successful deploying machine learning in trading. Early on, one of the areas that we build our capability in is reinforcement learning. We opened our first center in RL in Edmonton, the birthplace of reinforcement learning at the University of Alberta, where Rich Sutton is the expert in-house. And we decided to invest in that because we found that there's a lot of sequential data in our business that would formulate very well for analysis using RL algorithms. We put that in practice first in our capital markets business, building RL algorithms that are trading now and performing online learning very successfully for the past 3 years in the market.
Next, maybe a little bit of a provocation. There's a widely held view that large organizations favor innovations of more incremental nature, precisely because maybe of some of the challenges around scale, with the changes surrounding breakthrough innovations being maybe just too high a tax for larger organizations that bear. So, put another way, the assertion is that tech disruption is maybe just harder in larger organizations. Joanne, harking back to our conversation before the panel started, I think you disagree with that statement.
I think the idea that, in this context, is AI disruptive? I think hopefully as technologists we're not as scared of AI as the general public. There are real questions around AI, inequality that it creates in society, and I think if you look at those, it's quite daunting. But the idea that an organization, how organizations innovate and adopt new technology is very culturally specific to that organization. As I said, we have a long history of adapting. We're a very flat culture, and we kind of gravitate towards problem solving. And so if there's an obvious technology that could be used to solve that problem, it seems quite natural for us to do that. But saying that, right, we've got 11,000 software engineers, 4,000 of which for decades have focused on, from what I can tell, the current definition of machine learning. And so the idea that you use statistical techniques to solve market problems, particularly if you imagine, when I joined Goldman Sachs 20 years ago, we had 200 traders on NASDAQ executing orders. Now we've got 3. And it seems quite natural to us, that evolution. No one's even questioned that, really, at work. And so, that machine learning techniques have completely disrupted how we interfaced with electronic markets. And no one really questions that anymore. They're completely changed from when I started my career and how they work now. And so the way to really articulate that question is there something that AI can do that profoundly changes the way that we work day to day? The most profound change that we've seen, similar to what you were saying, is really in the natural language processing. So I think of AI in 2 camps. The AI that is based upon cognitive and biological processes, which is most intrusive on people's day-to-day lives today, right? Vacuum cleaners, all that stuff. And there's the AI which is a bit more subtle, which is my PhD, which is in actually natural language processing or semiotics. That's been most impactful at work. So we use that rather than pay consultancies to come in and read all our legal agreements when we want to repaper them. We'll use AI firms that help us do text interpretation. And that's been enormously effective for us. It's basically, we've never had Goldman Sachs staff do that work. And in fact, much of the fintech scene has been kind of enriching our ecosystem as opposed to disrupting it. 5 years ago, everybody thought, everybody would say to me, aren't you worried about disruption? And 5 years later, it's enhanced the ecosystem, not disrupted it. So that's a really good example of that. Now, if you think about, regulations that have happened over the last 5 years, each one of them has required a massive repapering of our contracts with clients. We use AI and natural language processing to do that. If you think about, just understanding how people talk together at work, profoundly, the big thing that changed in the way that companies operate now is that everybody wants to be connected to everybody in a real-time way. AI and natural language processing really helps that. I get 6,000 emails a day. 6,000 emails a day. I'll probably get 7,000 from this event now. And so the thing is I can't actually, what do I do with that? The anxiety that this over-communication causes in organizations today is really profound. And we haven't really got a solution for that, but AI is helping us understand how people communicate. You know, in financial services, we have very clear restrictions, more than any other industry, that this person in this job cannot communicate with that person in this job. And so imagine that in a world where everybody wants to be connected. It's a very, very unique problem to our industry. And so, you know, we're using AI to kind of think, well, this person and the way they communicate is probably in this type of role. And roles adapt all the time. You don't have to get promoted or, like, we're not the army. You know, you don't change title. That, you know, in my entire career, 25 years, I've had 3 job titles at Goldman Sachs. 3 promotions. My job changes all the time. And the way I interact with people changes all the time. Think about those dimensions, profoundly, how you adapt technology. Huge opportunities for AI to disrupt that, but not cognitively. You know, people talk about neural networks. Yeah, that's fine. But the most profound way is people and the way that they interact. And unfortunately, the most scary for people as well.
Josh,
I'll give 2 examples of where, because I think you're right, where you've got the data, you've got domain, it's the application. I think we're doing a really good job, and there's all sorts of use cases, both at the cognitive end, back end. I'll give you 2 areas, though, where we've not yet worked out exactly how to do it, or we certainly haven't claimed full success. So an obvious point, we are trying, like everyone else, to move data to the cloud. And part of that is saying, instead of every little process having its own application, a particular fraud application when you access, a different application for monitoring journeys, a different one that's looking at cyber, and then the same from the customer end, it's pretty obvious that if you greenfielded this, you would ingest data to the cloud, and by the way, it's a really interesting machine learning opportunities on the ingestion side, not on the use side, and you would have the permissions, because for different purposes, whether it's financial crime, for marketing, different people have reasons to use the data. That's what you would do. One of the challenges in enabling that would make a lot of difference of our pace of further services is if, as we migrate a whole set of applications to the cloud, we actually use that to deprecate a whole bunch of those applications, because you have a common data set and you actually replace application owners with analytics teams in the cloud or data science teams for that particular purpose. That is a mind-bogglingly complicated task. We've taken it on and we are trying to organize around it. That would be a good example of a transformation that we're needing to do. And then the other one, which goes way beyond banking, yes, some of these problems that we thought we would solve are easier and some are harder. If you'd told me during the first dot-com boom, and you have to go back 12 years to the days of Groupon or what Visa and MasterCard would be, that it would be 2019, and we still don't all have a service that helps us do smarter shopping as opposed to discounts. What we want is a tool that helps us get great offers on the things that we want and need to have. We don't really want a whole bunch of different discounts, so the equivalent of your 6,000 emails a day. A lot of consumers have all of these different sites, cards, banks that they're looking to. That problem statement has proved difficult. What we've found is that in certain areas like servicing, where you have lots of people asking the same few questions in lots of different ways, chatbots, AIs work really well. Where you've actually had a problem where you've got what seems to be a similar question, but actually people are asking you a huge diversity of questions underneath, has proved a dramatically more complicated problem to solve than I think most people in this industry would have expected 10, 12 years ago.
I want to make sure I answer your question specifically. The question was, is it possible to move forward in a kind of wavefront model and adopt technology in a large organization? So yes, but the way that works in practice, in my experience, isn't that I'll make a mandate for some technology. I never make mandates for technology. It's completely countercultural for us, ever. If the technology is really good, it kind of speaks for itself and people run towards it and they use it. And that's our kind of sentiment around technology. Like if it's a really good platform and it's reliable and it solves a common problem, then it will roll out like a contagion. And that's the way, to my experience, technology is best adopted. And I think the problem is, you know, in this particular area of AI, is the managing of the complexity. Like, we do have fiduciary responsibilities to our clients. And so we're very thoughtful about those aspects, and you can't just run towards the technology. But saying that, we largely, if it solves that kind of, if it operates in that space and has a very, very kind of thoughtful and great technology, we use it very quickly. Very quickly.
So for your respective organizations, would you place the emphasis, in terms of, let's say, the promise for AI, and the impact that it can have on your organizations, would you place the emphasis more on frontline applications, things that are changing how you interact with customers on the one hand, or on, let's say, operational efficiencies internally, maybe things that help you manage the organizational complexity intrinsic to large organizations?
We've largely, a couple of distinguishing, we've largely bought our AI technologies rather than develop. That's kind of a change for us. We're very, very much in the market for buying technology now, as opposed to building it ourselves. We still got a huge pool of developers, they're kind of busy, right? So this is kind of enhancing. And so that's a significant change for us. I think as well, there are some specific questions around, and you really get into the ethical nature of AI now. And to us, where AI offers challenges is when a customer cannot perceive the difference between dealing with an AI routine and dealing with a person. Mm-hmm. And so we're nowhere near that, but I can see technologies emerging, particularly in call centers. We've just launched Marcus. We're oversubscribed to Marcus. It's been unbelievably successful. We don't see ourselves as opening branches or competing in a retail bank, but it's quite obvious you're talking to a person in our call center. And I was at a panel event in Brussels last week, and there was a Chinese company that was very proud of the fact that they had, you could talk to their call centers for 8 minutes before you realized you weren't talking to a human being. You're on the edge there of some of these ethical questions. And our regulators are very focused on those questions.
I'm not sure that's on the edge of the ethical issues. I think that's slap bang in the heart of the issue. But I just want to come back to the scale and disruption question. Because I've worked in startups and I've worked in large organizations, and I don't think it's a question that large organizations are averse to disruptive innovation. I just think that a lot of people miss a mental model for kind of thinking about things. So I think there's two types of innovation. There's that type which is just technology as an enabler to do what we do today, but just slightly better. And I think this is going to be heresy here, but I think actually most of the stuff we're doing with AI is in that space. So sorry, but I think that's the reaction, the reality of the situation. And it's really important that we do that. It's really important that we build a portfolio and have as many initiatives as possible and prioritize them based on value. That's when we reach, I think, scale AI. And I think that's the journey we're all on. But there's a different aspect to innovation as well, which is when a technology or capability becomes core to our organization day one. And that's the really disruptive stuff. And that's really hard to hold in balance with the incremental. But you've got to do that, I think. And if you don't do that, then you run the risk of being disrupted out of relevance. And so for an organization like ours, the question is, what is the capability that's going to be core to our business day one? And we're in the process of trying to think about that question. But I can give you an example that's not AI, and this is the Festival of AI and Emerging Tech, the big catch-all of all the other exciting stuff. It's not actually from Fidelity International, but it's from our sister organization in the US. And the founder of the business recognized very early on that cryptocurrency was going to be, and blockchain was going to be a big thing. And we started to experiment within our research center in Boston around the different places that we could bring that in. And it was very clear that that wasn't going to be something we could just bolt into our business day one. That wasn't something that we could add in as an incremental thing. It was somehow quite disruptive. And so over a period of number of years, we realized what the opportunity was. And so last year we announced that we're going to set up a custodian business for cryptocurrencies focused on institutions initially. And that's something we launched last year. And that's something which is a core proposition. It's a new line of business for us, day one. It had to be incubated within the same innovation team. But it was clear that we made that choice of going disruptive on that. And the question for AI is, what is that opportunity for us? And my personal view, not a Fidelity view, but my personal view is that in the world of asset management and wealth management, our business is really all about, aside from the kind of the money management aspect, it's all about relationship management. And so the breakthrough technology, to come to some of these other points, is around conversational agents. And so if we get really good at being able to have a conversation with a customer and balance the really important ethics question as well, then that's potentially something which is new to our organization and disruptive to our industry day one. But so that's a personal view, and not necessarily a Fidelity view. But to be good at that, it's not just about building the conversation interface, which is obviously a large part of it. It's also about having the infrastructure behind the scenes to support it, and that's really where I could get very excited about microservices or API orchestration behind the scenes, because if you can decompose your business into that way, then suddenly a conversation agent enables you to do things which would be impossible today.
To your point about building capabilities, there's a lot of people in the audience and attending CogX who come from startup companies, who come from product companies. All large organizations have this trade-off that they have to navigate between building or buying or partnering. How do your organizations think about navigating that trade-off? What are the to the extent that you're looking to develop some of these capabilities yourselves, some of these solutions yourselves, like what distinguishes the things that you're building from the things that you're happy to procure?
Shall I start with that? First thing is, we are very explicitly trying to make HSBC an easier place for fintechs, startups to work with. When I joined, I used to make this joke that says, if we found a great startup, we wait for it to be bought by one of the huge systems integrators or tech companies where they double the price, the quality of the product gets worse, and then we might start using them. We have to be very different in that world, and we are. Now getting there is difficult, and one example is actually what, Charles, you were just saying. We're very clear that if it is a chatbot agent, we will tell the customer straight away. We're actually creating this, we've branded the sound of HSBC actually as one of the, and we're looking at signals to do that. Or if you look at where we are using models for robo-advice type pieces, we are very clear, and we will restrict some of the optimization for the explainability of what the results are, and that is a constraint on where the model. So we feel we're very clear about our the conduct obligations we have towards our customers, both in the wholesale and the retail side, to do that. That adds complexity, though, when we're working with the fintech. So we've made some investments in things like Quantexa in Bud, and we have a whole plan of people to make it easier. The challenge is that when you've got particularly a small company that's on a very specific product roadmap or a capability roadmap, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One, to train the data, we need to provide a set of data, and that can provide a whole bunch of rules that we have to get through even to provide the data to the startup. Or we're not always able to do an MVP of a customer. One of the great things of the sandboxes that now happen in financial services, because if we have obligations, again, around vulnerable customers, around accessibility, it can suddenly hugely add to the complexity. So the answer to the question is, we are doing it, we want to do a lot more. It's a long journey to get to the point where it's easy for that to happen.
Foteini, you're in a labs environment. You're really on the development side of the organization. But how do you think about navigating that trade-off at the level of RBC? How does RBC think about that trade-off?
So we do everything. So we've decided which areas we're comfortable buying technology in, and perhaps which areas we see more of a competitive advantage that we need to retain as a company, so we would rather build in-house. One of the challenges of working with vendors in this space is exactly your point here, especially with startups. There's a natural friction here, which is startup companies want to move fast, break things, which is generally okay, and it's welcome in most enterprises. But when it comes to AI, I think that makes a lot of people want to take a step back and be a bit more thoughtful. And so that really drags the cycle of deployment of brand new technologies in large companies. So that would be my advice, honestly, for startup companies looking to sell to big banks, is just be extremely patient, because banks themselves are trying to figure out how to use non-explainable models, how to work with their regulators and their clients, understand where the limits are, because they're not clear yet, and then work with other companies as well and incur that risk. But we see our in-house development as the place where we create our competitive advantage, our primarily our concern, especially for our retail business, is we're moving away from our clients. The more and more technology companies are entering the space and getting between us. And we came from a world where people used to work in a branch and they would tell the financial advisor what they need and they would have that personal relationship. They don't anymore. We don't understand our clients very well. They broadcast, though, their needs and their lives on technology platforms. And slowly we see a lot of disruption coming from that space. So this is where we're using AI to better understand our clients' needs, what stage in their life they are, what do they need, how do they fulfill their goals, and all that we build in-house.
I'm not sure Mark Zuckerberg has been incredibly successful. With Facebook, I think it was the biggest IPO of its day in 2016. But that move fast and break things mantra just cannot work in financial services. So we've got to move fast and not break things. That's the mantra we've got to find, and it's a really hard balance. But I think that's where an organisation like the work we're doing at Fidelity is how do you still do the really interesting tech innovation, but at the same time protect the franchise and Fidelity is a privately owned organisation, which is a really interesting dynamic because it's one where the values of the firm really shine out into the culture of the firm. And then if you're an organisation that holds your values very highly and very strongly, then it should be second nature to make sure that the tech that you build reflects those values. And it's one of the things that we're trying to do in Fidelity is to start that conversation with all of our stakeholders, starting internally with our colleagues, about what are the things that are important to them. So chatbots, for example. How many chatbots do we see that are female? The vast majority of chatbots that are deployed, even in financial services, are female. I think Bank of America's chatbot is called Erica, and American Express's is called Sally. There's a reason for that, and that's because the project teams want to make sure that their chatbot projects are successful, and the research shows that female gender chatbots have a higher user acceptance. But there's suddenly a big question for us as a firm is if suddenly all of our automated conversation agents are of a particular gender or even Western names, then it starts to reinforce the biases that we have in society. And that's a real ethics question. It's not about explainability or transparency or bias. It's actually about what is the intent that we have as a business. And you can only answer that question, I feel, if you have a conversation with your stakeholders, and you need to have an ethics forum to be able to have that dialogue. And if you can do that, then you can balance the moving fast and getting the breakthrough with the balancing, the protecting the franchise.
I actually don't think that as organisations we're best placed to do this. I think that we shouldn't do this independently of each other. So one of the things that we've done is so first let me answer the vendor question. We've got thousands of vendors that we use every day. And our core processing is risk and pricing. So that's core. The rest we're completely open to developing relations. The best relationships at Goldman Sachs are with smaller companies, which we want to work directly with the engineers. We don't like working with accounts and salespeople. We like engineer to engineer, and we like transparency on the technical solutions. And for those companies, it's an amazing experience to work with us because you're suddenly a part of, Goldman Sachs is one of those companies where we're 2 steps away from anybody. And you're now part of that ecosystem. And we really often, most of the most successful companies that we invest in our private investments comes through engineering. To enter our organization, get to know anybody in engineering, anybody, and they'll introduce you to that ecosystem. It's not top down at all, it's very much a collective. To answer the question about ethics, we've been engaging with Cambridge University's Centre for Future Intelligence, and we asked them the question, how do we manage AI code? Should we manage it differently? And they've been helping us really think about software development in an AI world. And it's very interesting, and one of the things that they said, which is to your point, is this technology appropriate? Is this an appropriate technology for the problem you're trying to solve? And this is a new concept because I think up to this time, any technology is worth trying and see how we adapt it. And I don't think that AI can be developed in an evolutionary way. I think we have to be very deliberate about this problem has the right kind of criteria, whatever that may be, for this type of sophistication and complexity. And it's our responsibility to make sure that in the positions we are, that feels right.
But are you speaking to a set of criteria where, I mean, there may be a question of suitability
definition.
and appropriateness tied to
problem.
technology,
so
right?
Arguably, is it appropriate to use AI in call centres? Is that an appropriate problem for AI?
But what does that mean, appropriate? Is it culturally appropriate? Is it from the...
But that's what we have to answer, isn't it?
So there was a question
that's what we have to answer.
Yesterday, I attended a panel which was brilliant on climate change and AI, and the question was posed: how do you use AI in order to help solve climate change? And this event signed up to the UN sustainability targets, but the question that should have been asked, that wasn't asked or answered, was actually there's a whole bunch of AI that's exacerbating climate change. If you look at the report that was published last week around how certain types of AI models have the carbon footprint of 5 cars. I mean, that's a horrific, dirty secret that we as a community are not talking about. So if you're going to talk about AI and climate change, there's a lot of good use of AI to do forecasting and use of energy and distribution.
Yeah, I mean,
there's also a lot of wastage as well.
But you said,
engineers,
Joanna,
engineers don't want to know this. Engineers want to I manage thousands and thousands of engineers, and they basically like to kind of take a solution and try it and adapt it just because the technology is there to use it.
Can I just do it the other way around, because it is quite a banking group.
Mm-hmm.
There's a much bigger issue here that we're all going to have to respond to, both on the retail side and on the wholesale side. It's when our customers start using AI-driven decision-making bots themselves. So if you are a retail customer and you have taken an AI device that will move your money around, it'll change your mortgage, it'll do your other services, and they're going to say, if you want to play this game, HSBC, you have to feed into our APIs with your feeds, or a wholesale treasurer who has an automated solution.
I don't think that's the problem. I think you're missing the point. I think HSBC could adopt a piece of AI.
Yep.
I'm a HSBC customer. I'm a HSBC customer because you're the only international bank, truly international bank. And if you're applying a piece of AI to my account without my consent or without my knowledge, you're on the border of ethical.
No, that's
use.
easy for us though, because we've already said we won't do that. We will tell you, we'll do it by voice, we're going to do that. That bit, we're very clear on our ethics and our principles. What though, the problem we have is, suppose a customer chooses their own front-end device and they say to us, all we want is a feed of your mortgage rate, your data rates. What is our obligation with respect to understanding that client-facing, and do we play that game or not? That's a much more complicated...
But there's still a decision for you there,
It is, but it's more complicated.
That's what I'm saying. There's a decision there.
Yep.
And that comes back to my point about microservices and APIs are potentially much more disruptive to us than the stuff that we're doing internally.
Right.
I think you've hit the nail on the head with that.
And Joanna, just a few minutes ago, you mentioned that, your organizations are, maybe not terribly well placed to answer a lot of these questions, and you should be aligning and moving in concert. So what is the answer then? Is it the level of, HSBC, Goldman, a lot of different financial services companies together to, answer questions around appropriateness, or is it really we want more regulatory oversight?
I mean, the regulators are. I mean, we've got some of the most technically sophisticated regulators in the UK. And the Bank of England are very focused on this question. They run forums on this question. And I'm, very glad that they do, actually. I mean, I'll tell you what Cambridge have said to us, this Centre of Future Intelligence. They've basically said to us a couple of criteria. Make sure it's appropriate. Make sure you make a decision that you're going to use that piece of technology for that problem. And manage it. So unlike kind of other forms of code, if the data changes in any way whatsoever, this is a very hard question to answer, but if the data changes, the inputs change, you should do something. You should either retest or be aware of it. If the AI code is producing a set of actions that get routed to somebody, that could change. Be aware that that change has happened. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I could have a piece of machine learning that's routing work and suddenly decides the most efficient person to route it to would be the chairman. How am I going to explain that to him? I mean, that's an extreme case, but it's appropriate, isn't it? And then finally they said that if the kind of criteria or the problem, the underlying problem changes, you need to do something. Well, imagine that at scale. That's really complex. We don't do that with any other code, those questions. An engineer changes code.
So we're out of time, but I'll ask, very quickly, maybe if you can answer optimist or pessimist. I mean, on the one hand, we're at, this is London Tech Week, we're at CogX, the Festival of AI and Emerging Technology. There's a great deal to be optimistic about. At the same time, a lot of the technologies that we're talking about are exacerbating, socioeconomic inequalities, are making it, increasingly difficult to tell fact from fabrication, are, personalized experiences are, in a way, eroding our collective and shared experiences. There's a great deal to be pessimistic about as well. So, given the increasing pace of change from the technologies we've been talking about, are you, on balance, an optimist or a pessimist? Charles?
So I don't think it's about being an optimist or pessimist. I think it's such a passive position to be in. I think it's about being either passive or active. And so as somebody who really believes in the great opportunities from technology, then I want the world to be something that we design. I want a future that we design for. And so I think that's the conversation we need to engage with. And we can all watch Black Mirror, we can all get worried about stuff that might happen, and that's fun for Hollywood. But we need to be active in a conversation about getting to the future we need to design and build for. And that's a conversation we all need to be part of, whatever our backgrounds are.
Foteini?
Optimist. I've been waiting way too long for science to get to the point where it is today. I'm really excited about what we can do with it. If I'm concerned, I'm actually not so worried about things like job losses or responsible AI development. I think we had a bad start, especially in the tech sector this year, that gave AI a PR crisis, but we saw a lot of good things as well. We saw the city of San Francisco retracking our face recognition software. We saw Google not releasing code, taking responsibility over potential misuse. Companies, I think, are coming around, recognizing the responsibility they have. But how can you not be an optimist here? Like it's a technology that...
That's a longer conversation.
Okay, sure.
Joanne, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, in my lifetime, the most profound use of AI has been the internet. Right? The semantic definition that underlines the internet. And I can't even imagine my life without the internet now. I mean, when I was a teenager, how did I function without search? And that has really benefited our lives day to day. And so that's the best example we have of wholesale AI use. And so I'm incredibly optimistic about it.
Josh, in a word?
I'm an optimist, not because of the tech and the data, because I've been an optimist about that for a long time. If you wander around, even CogX the last couple of days, the shift in the conversation around the regulation, the governance, how this works, I'm starting really to clearly see how as a society we can start to regulate that and do that in a better way.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.